Imagine waking up tomorrow with the unshakable knowing that no betrayal, no rejection, no loss, not even the haunting echoes of your past, can touch you again, not because life becomes easier, but because you become untouchable. Strange, right? What if your deepest pain wasn't a curse, but a secret training ground for power? Now, before you roll your eyes and say, yeah, I've heard this before, let me ask, what if every wound was never meant to break you, but to burn away your illusions, so that nothing and nobody could ever control your peace again? You see, we spend our lives armored against pain, only to become prisoners of our own fear. But today, you'll discover the switch that flips suffering into sovereignty. You'll meet the version of yourself who doesn't need closure to move on, doesn't seek permission to rise, and doesn't beg the world to treat them kindly in order to feel whole. And just when you think you've grasped it all, something deeper will hit you, something so unexpected it may just shatter the last layer of self-doubt clinging to your soul. There is a turning point in every awakened soul's journey, where the focus shifts from controlling circumstances to commanding internal power. It's the moment you stop asking, "Why is this happening to me?" and start asking, "How am I choosing to respond?" In that subtle pivot, everything changes. The world doesn't suddenly become less cruel, less unpredictable, or less chaotic. People don't magically stop lying, leaving, or letting you down. But what transforms, what becomes invincible, is your ability to remain centered while the storm rages outside. Mastery of your inner response doesn't mean becoming numb or emotionless. It means cultivating a depth of awareness so profound that no external trigger can hijack your peace without your permission. Most people spend their entire lives trying to fix, adjust, or manipulate the outer world in hopes of feeling safe, loved, or validated. They pour energy into changing others, obsessing over outcomes, and micromanaging every detail, only to discover that control is an illusion that constantly slips through their fingers. This is the trap of unconscious living, believing that your well-being depends on everything going your way. But when you live like that, you hand over your emotional power to everything and everyone. A late response from someone you care about ruins your day. A slight tone in someone's voice triggers old abandonment wounds. A failed opportunity makes you question your worth. In this reactive state, your nervous system becomes a slave to the environment. But the truth is, you can retrain yourself to respond with clarity instead of panic, wisdom instead of woundedness, strength instead of self-sabotage. This is where real freedom lies. It begins with observing your triggers without immediately obeying them. It requires asking yourself, is this moment demanding survival, or is it reviving an old wound I haven't healed yet? That simple question places you back in the driver's seat. You stop playing the victim and start becoming the alchemist of your own emotions. One of the most radical shifts you can make is learning to sit with discomfort without immediately trying to escape it. Pain is not the enemy, it is the messenger, but we numb it with distractions, deflect it with blame, and drown it in overthinking. When you choose to face it head-on, with presence rather than resistance, you transmute it into power. Your inner response becomes a sacred pause between stimulus and reaction. In that pause, you reclaim the ability to choose differently than your past self. You realize that not every emotion demands expression, not every insult requires a defense, not every betrayal calls for revenge, and not every loss needs to be mourned forever. This kind of internal mastery doesn't come from motivational quotes or temporary highs. It's forged in the fire of intentional discomfort. It's built by confronting your deepest fears, rejection, failure, unworthiness, and discovering that they cannot destroy you unless you believe they can. Imagine someone insults you, criticizes your path, or abandons your love. In the past, you may have unraveled, questioning your value, spiraling into over-analysis, or becoming consumed by resentment. But now, imagine responding with grounded stillness, not coldness, but calm certainty. You no longer need to prove your worth, explain your soul, or beg for understanding. That's what happens when your inner compass becomes stronger than the world's noise. You become anchored, unshakable, and in that anchoring, nothing and nobody can hurt you. Not because the world changed, but because you did. Every time you choose your inner peace over your ego's reaction, you rewire your mind for resilience. You build new neural pathways that signal safety, strength, and stability. And over time, you notice that your triggers lose their grip. The same people, patterns, and problems that once consumed you now pass through you like waves brushing against a mountain. This is not spiritual bypassing or emotional detachment. This is deep-rooted sovereignty. It's the result of facing your inner chaos until it no longer controls your choices. Humor can be a powerful reset during this journey. After all, isn't it funny how we sometimes give total strangers the power to ruin our day just because they didn't smile back or hit like? Recognizing the absurdity of our old programming creates space for conscious evolution. You become a witness to your mind, not a prisoner of it. The more you observe without reacting, the more you weaken the patterns that once enslaved you. Fear loses its power when you stop feeding it. Anger dissolves when you stop attaching stories to it. And sadness transforms when you stop resisting it. You come to realize that nothing outside of you has the final say in how you feel. Your nervous system becomes your ally, not your enemy. Your emotions become guides, not threats. And your energy becomes sovereign, no longer dictated by external approval or validation. Mastering your inner response is not about never feeling again. It's about feeling deeply without drowning. It's the art of protecting your peace without closing your heart. You stop trying to bend life to your will and instead become the kind of person who cannot be broken by life. You stop searching for perfect conditions to be okay and start creating an unshakable okayness within yourself. We spend much of our lives gripping tightly to the illusion of control, as if holding on hard enough will protect us from pain, chaos, or disappointment. This illusion is comforting. It gives us a false sense of safety, as though if we plan everything perfectly, say the right words, love hard enough, anticipate every threat, we'll be spared the sting of betrayal or the shock of sudden change. We micromanage conversations, obsess over outcomes, and replay scenarios in our minds, desperately trying to influence how others behave or how life unfolds. But the more we cling, the more we suffer. Because the truth is, we never had control to begin with. Not over other people's thoughts, not over their choices, not over the curveballs life throws at us when we least expect them. Control is the mind's attempt to create certainty in an uncertain world, and while it feels powerful at first, it eventually becomes a prison. Trying to control everything is exhausting. It drains our energy, erodes our peace, and distorts our ability to live in the present. We stop trusting ourselves because we've placed our trust in the outcome. And when things don't go as we planned, which they often don't, we internalize the failure as a reflection of our worth or effort. We think, if only I had done this differently, or maybe if I'd said more, loved harder, been better, then maybe they would have stayed, or the opportunity wouldn't have slipped away. But this mindset traps us in a cycle of self-blame and anxiety. It binds our happiness to things we cannot predict, and it postpones our peace until everything aligns just right. There is a deeper wisdom in learning to release that grip. Reclaiming your peace means remembering that while you cannot control people or events, you can always control your response. And that is where true power lies. It doesn't lie in bending life to your will. It lies in becoming unshaken when life bends unexpectedly. Detachment is not indifference. It's not apathy or avoidance. It's presence without possession. It's loving without clinging, giving without expectation, showing up fully while knowing that nothing is guaranteed. When you detach from the illusion of control, you begin to experience freedom in its purest form, the kind of freedom that lets you breathe deeply, even when life feels uncertain, even when someone leaves, even when the job doesn't come through, even when the plan falls apart. Letting go feels terrifying at first because it forces us to confront our own vulnerability. We realize how much we've relied on outcomes to feel okay inside. We realize how we've mistaken control for love, for safety, for self-worth. And as painful as that awakening can be, it is also the birthplace of something sacred, the return to self-trust. You begin to ask different questions. Not, how do I control this, but how do I hold space for this without losing myself? Not, how do I make them stay, but how do I stay true to myself regardless of what they choose? This shift changes everything. You begin to honor your emotions without letting them dictate your reality. You become aware of your fears without letting them build walls around your heart. You stop trying to force healing and instead allow it to unfold, moment by moment. And yes, sometimes it feels counterintuitive. After all, we've been conditioned to fight for what we want, to never give up, to push harder when things resist. But there's a difference between persistence and attachment. One is rooted in courage, the other in fear. When you act from fear, you try to control every detail because you're afraid of what might happen if you don't. When you act from courage, you trust yourself enough to release what isn't aligned, to walk away when something costs you your peace, to surrender without collapsing. The strongest people are not those who force things to happen. They are the ones who know when to let go, when to stop chasing, when to be still in the midst of chaos and say, even this cannot take my peace. You begin to understand that peace is not found in perfect conditions, but in the way you meet imperfect ones. It's not about getting everything right. It's about how gently and honestly you respond when things go wrong. When you detach from outcomes, you start living in alignment with your core instead of your ego. You begin to trust that life's rejections are redirections. You learn to sit with the unknown without trying to force clarity. You realize that closure doesn't always come from the other person. It often comes from choosing to close the door yourself, with grace, with dignity, with deep knowing that you deserve peace more than you deserve answers. You'll notice how much more space you have in your mind and body when you stop trying to hold everything together. You stop interpreting delays as failures, silence as rejection, endings as punishments. You begin to breathe easier, laugh deeper, and feel lighter, not because everything is perfect, but because you no longer require perfection to feel okay. The need to control fades, and in its place grows a steady confidence, one that says, whatever happens, I trust myself to handle it. You stop grasping and start receiving. You stop forcing and start flowing. And in that flow, you find a peace that was never out there to begin with. It was always waiting within you, buried under the weight of control. There comes a moment in every person's life when they realize they've been living not from who they truly are, but from who they had to become in order to survive. The roles we play, the masks we wear, the silent agreements we make just to stay accepted, loved, or safe, none of it reflects our highest self. It reflects our wounded self, the one shaped by fear, rejection, abandonment, and trauma. Survival identities are clever. They help us navigate the world when we feel powerless. The perfectionist learns to overachieve so they won't be criticized. The peacemaker learns to stay silent so they won't be abandoned. The controller micromanages everything so they won't feel vulnerable. These identities become second nature. We forget they were coping mechanisms. We confuse them for our personality. But the truth is, they were never who we were meant to be. They were who we needed to be to endure what we didn't have the tools to understand. Rewriting your identity from survival to sovereignty doesn't mean erasing the past. It means honoring the ways you protected yourself while choosing not to let those patterns define your future. Survival says, I need to stay small to feel safe. Sovereignty says, I claim my space without apology. Survival says, let me fix everything so they won't leave. Sovereignty says, if it costs me my peace, it's not worth keeping. This shift is not superficial. It's not about changing your habits on the surface. It's about rewriting the story you tell yourself about who you are and what you deserve. It's about confronting the unconscious beliefs that have kept you trapped in cycles of pain, that love must be earned, that your worth depends on others' approval, that if you're not needed, you're not valuable. To reclaim your sovereignty, you must first meet the parts of yourself you've exiled, the part that cries quietly after pretending all day to be strong, the part that shrinks in relationships, afraid to ask for what it truly wants, the part that's terrified of being alone, yet exhausted from always being available. These parts are not weak, they are evidence of your depth. They are whispers from your soul asking to be seen, not shamed. Survival teaches you to suppress them. Sovereignty teaches you to integrate them. You stop judging your emotions as good or bad and start recognizing them as messengers. Anger tells you where your boundaries have been violated. Sadness tells you where you've abandoned yourself. Anxiety tells you where you're living out of alignment. This level of self-awareness is radical. It interrupts every autopilot pattern you've ever leaned on. It forces you to pause and ask, who am I when I'm not performing for love, chasing validation, or hiding my truth? Most people don't want to ask that question because the answer requires change, and change is uncomfortable, but it's through discomfort that you grow. Not the kind of discomfort that keeps you trapped in old pain, but the kind that stretches you into new strength. Rewriting your identity means no longer being loyal to your suffering. It means no longer identifying with your trauma more than your transformation. You stop calling it just how I am and start asking, who could I become if I stopped living like I was still in danger? Sovereignty is not about having power over others. It's about no longer giving others power over your peace. It's the freedom to say no without guilt, to walk away without closure, to speak your truth without needing it to be understood. It's the strength to stand alone when necessary, and the softness to receive love without fear. It's looking at your reflection and no longer seeing brokenness, but brilliance. Not perfection, but presence. You begin to live from a place of grounded authority, not the kind that shouts to be heard, but the kind that radiates without effort. You make decisions based on your values, not your fears. You stop seeking permission to take up space. You stop negotiating your boundaries. You stop outsourcing your identity to the opinions of others. This inner shift affects everything: how you show up in relationships, how you pursue your goals, how you handle failure. You no longer attach your worth to outcomes. You no longer see rejection as a threat, but as redirection. You begin to recognize that the world mirrors your own beliefs. When you see yourself as enough, you stop tolerating anything that treats you as less. And that's when life begins to rearrange around your new identity, not because it's magic, but because you're finally aligned. You're no longer surviving, you're leading, you're no longer reacting, you're choosing. And the choices you make from sovereignty create a reality that survival could never reach. You stop being a victim of your circumstances and start becoming the author of your reality. Even when life throws you challenges, you don't collapse, you recalibrate. You don't ask, why me? You ask, what's the lesson and how do I rise? You don't wait for someone to save you. You become the protector and provider of your own spirit. You speak to yourself with reverence, not ridicule. You rest not out of exhaustion, but because you honor your energy. You no longer hustle for worthiness, you embody it. And even in the quietest moments, you feel the power of your own presence echoing through every choice you make. There is a certain kind of power that doesn't need to raise its voice, doesn't need to explain itself, and certainly doesn't need to beg for respect. And that power comes from boundaries so clear, so unshakable, that even your silence commands understanding. It's not about being cold, distant, or unapproachable. It's about being rooted so deeply in self-respect that the energy you carry does the talking. Boundaries are not walls to keep people out. They are filters that decide what gets in and what must stay out. They are the invisible lines drawn by your healing, your growth, and your wisdom. Lines that silently declare what your soul will and will not tolerate anymore. For far too long, many of us have mistaken silence for weakness or boundaries for rudeness. We've been conditioned to believe that being nice means being endlessly available, constantly agreeable, and always self-sacrificing. We say yes when we mean no, smile when we're hurting, and stay quiet when our dignity is on the line. But that kind of living doesn't breed love. It breeds resentment. It chips away at the very core of who you are until you're left feeling invisible in your own life. True kindness is not self-abandonment. True love is not martyrdom. And true strength is not about how much you can tolerate. It's about how gracefully you enforce your limits without needing to justify them. When your boundaries are strong, people learn quickly how to treat you, not because you're loud or aggressive, but because your energy is unmistakably sovereign. You stop explaining your worth. You stop negotiating your values. You stop giving second, third, and 10th chances to those who never honored the first. You begin to understand that boundaries are not just about protecting yourself from others. They're about preserving your peace, your time, your emotional bandwidth. They're about choosing your highest self over and over, even when it's uncomfortable, even when it means being misunderstood. You start saying no with love and yes with intention. You start walking away from chaos, not with anger, but with calm certainty. You start removing yourself from conversations, dynamics, and spaces that feel heavy, not because you can't handle them, but because you know you don't have to. And yes, at first, people will resist. The ones who benefited from your lack of boundaries will question the new version of you. They'll call you selfish, distant, dramatic. Let them. That's not your burden to carry anymore. Their discomfort is not a sign that you're doing something wrong. It's a sign that you're doing something different, something necessary. You're no longer accessible to emotional vampires, to users, to those who thrive on your silence and guilt. And the beauty is, you don't even have to announce it. You don't need a long monologue or a dramatic exit. Your silence becomes the statement. Your absence becomes the answer. Your detachment becomes the loudest declaration of self-love you've ever made. People underestimate the power of quiet boundaries. They think the only way to set limits is with confrontation. But when you're rooted in your truth, you don't chase closure, you don't demand apologies, and you don't try to convince anyone of your worth. You simply remove your energy from spaces that dishonor it. That act alone speaks volumes. It says, I value myself too much to stay here. It says, I no longer seek to be understood by those committed to misunderstanding me. It says, I choose peace over performance. This is not bitterness, it's wisdom. It's what happens when you've healed the part of you that once equated love with sacrifice and attention with approval. Building boundaries this strong requires self-awareness. You must know your patterns, your triggers, your tendencies to overextend. You must know what costs you emotionally, what drains your spirit, and what disguises itself as love but leaves you feeling small. You must take an honest inventory of where you've abandoned yourself just to keep the peace. Then you rebuild, brick by brick, decision by decision, word by word, until your life reflects not the fears that shaped you, but the values that guide you. Until every yes you give is rooted in joy, not obligation. Until every no you speak feels like a sacred act of self-preservation. You'll begin to notice something remarkable. When your boundaries are clear, your relationships deepen. Not with everyone, but with the right ones. The ones who respect your limits, who honor your time, who cherish your authenticity. The ones who don't need you to shrink, dim, or bend in order to love you. With them, you can be your full self, unfiltered, unedited, unafraid. And with yourself, you'll feel something even rarer, peace. The kind of peace that doesn't depend on who stays or who goes. The kind of peace that lives in your bones because you finally trust yourself to protect your energy. This isn't about being unkind. It's about being clear. And clarity is a gift, to yourself and to others. It removes confusion, eliminates mixed signals, and sets the tone for how you expect to be treated. You no longer participate in conversations that go in circles. You no longer argue with people committed to misunderstanding you. You no longer keep explaining the same boundary over and over again. You simply act. And in that action, your silence becomes your armor, your clarity becomes your compass, and your energy becomes a fortress where only those who come with respect are allowed to enter.